She had no clue I pulled the strings. That smug HOA president stood there with a gun on her hip while her friend shot at my prize cattle. Bullets flew across my family farm as they laughed, turning my property into their private shooting range without permission. They caused thousands in damages, terrorized my animals, and thought they could bully a simple farmer. But I had a secret they never suspected. I controlled every dollar in their $2 million HOA budget. Their shock when they discovered who really held the power? Absolutely priceless. My name is James Miller. My family has owned our 40-acre farm outside Willow Creek since 1923. At 48, I've dedicated my life to this land, building one of the most respected small farms in the county. I raise award-winning Angus cattle that fetch premium prices at auction, breed champion horses that compete in state fairs, and grow specialty hay that local farmers depend on. The farm isn't just my business, it's my heritage. My grandfather cleared this land with nothing but determination and a team of horses. My father expanded it during the tough farm crisis of the 1980s when others were selling out. Now it's my responsibility to preserve it for the next generation. 10 years ago, everything changed when Platinum Development bought the abandoned dairy farm next door. They bulldozed the old barns and silos, then constructed Sycamore Estates, a luxury gated community with 200 homes starting at $750,000 each. The developer, Victor Harrington, initially tried to pressure me into selling. "Your farm is an eyesore next to our luxury development," he told me. "Name your price." When I refused, he threatened that his homeowners would make my life difficult. I stood my ground, knowing my rights as a property owner. What nobody in Sycamore Estates knew was my professional background. Before returning to run the farm full-time after my father's health declined, I spent 20 years as a senior financial consultant specializing in homeowners association audits. I'd uncovered millions in fraud across dozens of HOAs nationwide and had testified in federal cases that sent corrupt board members to prison. When Meridian Property Management took over Sycamore Estates, their CEO, an old colleague, discreetly approached me. "Jim, we need someone with your expertise. These high-end communities have complex finances that need oversight." They hired me as their senior financial controller, giving me review authority over all expenditures and sole signatory power on their $2 million annual budget. The community manager knew my identity, but to the HOA board, I was simply the financial controller they'd never met, just a name approving or denying their financial requests. For years, the arrangement worked seamlessly. The initial HOA board was reasonable, focused on maintaining property values without harassing neighbors. We even coordinated on boundary landscaping that benefited both their aesthetics and my privacy. Everything changed when Patricia Williams moved in last year. A 50-year-old former real estate developer from Chicago, she quickly manipulated her way onto the board and orchestrated a takeover as president. She arrived at meetings in tailored designer suits, flashed a diamond-encrusted watch, and drove a brand-new Mercedes GLS with custom plates reading Patricia 1. Within months, Patricia transformed the community. She implemented aggressive rule enforcement, doubled fines for violations, and pushed through expensive projects that mysteriously benefited properties near her own home. Homeowners who questioned her decisions found themselves targeted with petty violation notices. I've been watching these red flags, quietly documenting everything in my dual role. But I never anticipated what would happen next. Last Saturday morning, I was at the county farmers market selling my award-winning honey when my phone rang. It was Elmer Johnson, my 72-year-old neighbor who watches my property when I'm away. "Jim, you need to get back here now." Elmer's voice was shaking. "There's dozens of people on your back pasture shooting guns. Your animals are going crazy." My heart dropped. "Call the sheriff," I told him. "I'm on my way." I abandoned my booth and raced home in my pickup, the 15-minute drive feeling like hours. As I approached my property, I heard it, rapid gunfire like a war zone. I could see dust clouds rising where my cattle were stampeding in panic. What I found still makes my blood boil. Over 30 people had set up an elaborate shooting range on my south pasture, less than 300 yards from my horse stables. They'd hung paper targets on my fence posts, dragged my antique 1952 John Deere tractor, a family heirloom I'd spent 3 years restoring, into a field to use as a target, and were shooting directly toward my livestock areas. Beer coolers, folding chairs, and expensive shooting equipment were scattered across my hayfield. A professionally printed banner read, "First Annual Sycamore Estates Shooting Competition," with logos of local businesses as sponsors. Some participants wore matching T-shirts with the HOA logo and shooting team printed on the back. My prize stallion, Thunderbolt, valued at $75,000 and a 3-time state champion, was rearing and kicking in his enclosure, already bleeding from where he'd injured himself against the fence in panic. Several of my pregnant cattle, worth $15,000 each, had broken through an interior fence in their terror. My irrigation system was riddled with bullet holes, water spraying 15 feet into the air and flooding sections of fertile cropland. In the center of it all stood Patricia, wearing designer shooting gear with a holstered pistol on her hip. She carried a clipboard and was laughing as she collected cash from participants, occasionally taking shots herself at targets attached to my property. I pulled my truck directly into their line of fire and got out, trembling with rage. "Cease fire! Cease fire right now!" I shouted at the top of my lungs. The shooting gradually stopped as people noticed me. Some looked embarrassed, quickly lowering their weapons. Others seemed annoyed at the interruption. Patricia turned, her expression changing from annoyance to recognition. She whispered something to a board member beside her before approaching me with a practiced smile. "What do you think you're doing on my property?" I demanded, walking straight toward her. She adjusted her designer sunglasses. "Well, if it isn't the neighboring farmer. We're having a community event. This unused land is perfect for our shooting competition." "Unused land? This is my active farm. Those are my award-winning animals you're terrorizing. That's my antique tractor you've destroyed." I gestured toward Thunderbolt, still panicking in his enclosure, and the pregnant heifers who had broken through fencing. Patricia rolled her eyes. "Don't be so dramatic. We needed a venue. This seemed convenient. Besides, your little farm is an eyesore to our luxury community. We're actually improving the area by bringing some class to it." I noticed Richard Thompson, the HOA treasurer, looking uncomfortable nearby. "Patricia," he said quietly, "you told us you had permission from the owner." "Permission?" I exploded. "I never gave permission for armed trespassers to endanger my livestock and destroy my property." Patricia's smile tightened. "Look, we collected over $5,000 for this event. Everyone paid a $150 entry fee plus sponsor donations. I'm sure we can work something out." She reached into her Louis Vuitton bag and pulled out a checkbook. "How does $500 sound for the rental?" "That's generous considering this useless field." That's when I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Near the edge of the group, 2 teenagers were pointing their weapons at my cattle, laughing as the terrified animals ran in panic. "Those are pregnant heifers worth $15,000 each." I roared, running toward them. As I approached, another board member, Karen Mitchell, stepped in my way. "Relax, they're just having fun. No one's going to hit them from this distance. Kids will be kids." Just then, sirens wailed in the distance. Several participants began hurriedly packing up their equipment. Patricia's expression changed to alarm. "You call the police? That's completely unnecessary. We're respectable homeowners enjoying a weekend activity. You're armed trespassers destroying private property and endangering livestock." I corrected as Sheriff Johnson's cruiser pulled up, followed by 2 deputy vehicles. Sheriff Robert Johnson had known me for decades. We'd graduated high school together, and his family bought hay for mine for generations. He took one look at the situation and immediately radioed for additional units. "Everyone put down your weapons and show me identification," he commanded, his hand resting on his holster. Patricia smoothed her designer jacket and approached him with an extended hand. "Officer, I'm Patricia Williams, president of the Sycamore Estates Homeowners Association. This is just a misunderstanding. We're having a community event on private property without permission," the sheriff replied coolly, ignoring her hand. "That's criminal trespassing, ma'am, and I can see property damage from here." "We had verbal permission," Patricia insisted. Jim told me we could use this field. That's a bald-faced lie, I said. I've never spoken to this woman about using my property. As more deputies arrived, they began taking statements and photographs. My veterinarian, Dr. Martinez, arrived to check on my animals. The news wasn't good. Jim, Thunderbolt has a deep laceration on his right flank from hitting the fence, he said gravely. 2 of your pregnant heifers are showing signs of stress that could lead to miscarriage. And that one there, he pointed to Bessie, my oldest cow, has what appears to be a bullet graze on her flank. The sheriff overheard. Add animal cruelty to the charges, he told a deputy, who nodded and made notes. Patricia's face paled as she realized the seriousness of the situation. This is ridiculous. We're upstanding citizens with clean records, not criminals. Do you have any idea who my husband is? He plays golf with the county commissioner. Ma'am, upstanding citizens don't shoot at other people's animals, Sheriff Johnson replied calmly. Everyone present is being cited for criminal trespassing. Additional charges for property damage and animal cruelty are pending investigation. As deputies processed everyone, taking names and information, I overheard Richard ask Patricia, "What about all the money we collected? We need to refund everyone." Patricia hissed back, "Don't worry about that now. We've already deposited it in the special projects account. No one needs to know how much we actually collected." That caught my attention. The special projects account wasn't an authorized HOA account I'd approved. My financial controller immediately went on high alert. By Sunday morning, the initial shock had worn off, replaced by cold, calculated anger. I called Sandra Moore, the community manager at Meridian Property Management. "Jim, I was just about to call you," Sandra exclaimed. "I heard about what happened from several homeowners. It's absolutely appalling." "Sandra, I need to see all HOA financial records immediately," I said. "Patricia mentioned a special project account I've never authorized." There was a pause. "That's concerning. There shouldn't be any accounts I don't know about, and certainly none you haven't approved as our financial controller." 2 hours later, I was in Sandra's office reviewing documents. What we found was shocking. Patricia had opened an unauthorized account at First Regional Bank, completely bypassing both me and the management company. Nearly $120,000 in HOA fines and special event fees had been deposited over the past year. "This is textbook embezzlement," I said, examining the statements. "She's been collecting unauthorized funds and keeping them off the official books." We dug deeper and discovered more. Patricia had been selectively enforcing rules, targeting certain homeowners with excessive fines while ignoring violations by her friends. She'd hired her brother's landscaping company at triple the market rate for common area maintenance, and she'd approved a $50,000 security upgrade that primarily benefited her street, installed by her son-in-law's company. Most disturbing was evidence that she'd been falsifying board minutes and forging signatures, including mine, on financial documents to authorize these expenditures. "We need to involve law enforcement," Sanders said, visibly shaken. "This goes beyond HOA issues." "Not yet," I replied, a plan forming in my mind. "First, I want to handle this my way." That afternoon, I had 3 important meetings. First, with my attorney, Blake Williams, who documented all the property damage and animal injuries. The initial estimate for damages exceeded $30,000, not counting potential losses if my pregnant cattle miscarried. Second, I met with Diane Foster, a forensic accountant friend who helped me compile evidence of Patricia's financial misconduct. "Jim, this isn't just sloppy bookkeeping," Diane said. "This is deliberate fraud with clear intent to embezzle." Third, I visited my nephew, Marcus Miller, a district attorney specializing in white-collar crime. "Uncle Jim, what you've shown me is grounds for multiple felony charges," Marcus said, reviewing the documents in his office. "Embezzlement, fraud, money laundering, and potentially criminal conspiracy if other board members were knowingly involved." I outlined my plan. Marcus smiled as I explained what I intended to do. "It's completely legal," I assured him, "but I want you there as both family support and legal muscle." That evening, I received a text from Patricia. "This situation has gotten out of hand. I'm willing to pay $2,000 for the damages to avoid further unpleasantness. After all, neighbors should stick together. I'd hate to see how an extended legal battle might affect your quaint little farm. I didn't respond, but I did prepare a special financial report for the emergency HOA meeting scheduled for the following evening, one that would change Sycamore Estates forever. The morning of the meeting, something unexpected happened. Richard Thompson, the HOA treasurer, showed up at my farm. I saw his luxury SUV coming up my driveway from the kitchen window. "Mr. Miller, I need to speak with you privately," he said nervously when I met him outside. I invited him in for coffee. Richard was clearly uncomfortable, his hands shaking slightly as he accepted the mug. "I had no idea you didn't give permission for the shooting event," he began. "Patricia assured the board she had written approval from you. She showed us a document with your signature." "My signature was forged," I said flatly. Richard nodded. "I suspected as much. That's partly why I'm here." He pulled out a USB drive. "This contains financial records Patricia doesn't know I kept. She's been falsifying board minutes, creating fake invoices, and pocketing the difference between approved expenses and actual costs. Why are you giving me this?" I asked. Richard looked down. "Because I should have spoken up sooner. And because yesterday, after everything happened, she called an emergency board session without me. They voted to sue you for entrapment and endangering community members during an approved event. They're planning to announce it tonight and impose a special assessment of $1,000 per household to fund the lawsuit." This was even better than I'd hoped. "Thank you, Richard. I think you should attend tonight's meeting as planned. Say nothing about coming here." As he left, I called Marcus and Sandra. My plan needed a slight adjustment for maximum impact. The Sycamore Estates clubhouse was packed that evening. Nearly all 200 homeowners had crowded into the meeting room, with people standing along the walls. Patricia had even invited local news reporters, telling them they were covering the HOA's lawsuit against a negligent farmer endangering community members. Patricia looked triumphant as she called the meeting to order, dressed in an expensive suit with her signature pearl necklace gleaming under the lights. "Before we begin," she announced, "I want to address the unfortunate incident this weekend. The board has unanimously voted to file a lawsuit against James Miller for creating hazardous conditions that endangered our community members during a sanctioned event." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some looked confused, others nodded in agreement, having heard only Patricia's version of events. Furthermore, Patricia continued, "We're implementing an emergency special assessment of $1,000 per household to cover legal expenses and increase security measures. This is unfortunate but necessary to protect our community from hostile neighbors." That's when I stood up from my seat in the back row, my nephew beside me in his district attorney's suit, and Sandra from the management company on my other side. "Point of order," I said loudly. Patricia squinted into the crowd, her expression hardening when she spotted me. "This is a closed community meeting. You're not welcome here." I walked calmly to the front of the room, feeling every eye on me. "Actually, I am. Allow me to introduce myself properly. I'm James Miller, owner of Miller Family Farms. But I'm also the senior financial controller for Meridian Property Management, with exclusive signatory authority over all Sycamore Estates accounts for the past 10 years. The room went completely silent. Patricia's face drained of color so quickly I thought she might faint. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. Sandra stepped forward. "It's true. Mr. Miller is our senior financial consultant who approves all HOA expenditures and financial decisions. He has been since the community was established." I pulled out a stack of documents. "Yesterday, armed trespassers from this community, organized by your board president, caused over $30,000 in damages to my property and injured animals worth over $100,000. But that's just the beginning." I held up a financial report. "As the financial controller for your community, I've completed a preliminary audit of HOA finances. I've discovered evidence of approximately $120,000 in misappropriated funds, forged documents, and unauthorized accounts." The room erupted in shocked exclamations and angry questions. Several homeowners jumped to their feet. "That's absurd. Patricia shouted, her voice cracking. You can't prove anything. Actually, Richard spoke up unexpectedly, rising from his seat. I can confirm everything Mr. Miller is saying. As treasurer, I've been documenting discrepancies for months. He held up his own folder of documents. Marcus stepped forward, his DA badge visible on his belt. I'm Marcus Miller, district attorney for this county. Based on the evidence already compiled, we have grounds for multiple felony charges. Patricia lunged for the exit, but two sheriff's deputies who had quietly entered blocked her path. Patricia Williams, one deputy said, "You're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and criminal trespass." As I handcuffed her, Patricia looked back at me with pure hatred. You set me up. You've been playing us all along. I shook my head. No, Patricia, you set yourself up. I was just pulling the strings you never saw. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Patricia was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including embezzlement, fraud, criminal trespass, and animal cruelty. 3 other board members faced lesser charges for their involvement. The forensic audit I conducted revealed the full extent of Patricia's scheme. She had embezzled over $200,000 during her year as president. The special projects account was actually funding renovations on her vacation home in Florida, renovations that stopped abruptly when her assets were frozen. The HOA's insurance covered the damages to my farm, and Patricia's personal assets were seized pending criminal proceedings. My injured animals recovered, though Thunderbolt needed specialized therapy to overcome his trauma. A new HOA board was elected, composed of reasonable homeowners who valued community harmony over petty power trips. They implemented transparent financial practices and established a community relations committee specifically to maintain good relationships with neighboring properties. As for the teens who shot at my cattle, they were sentenced to 500 hours of community service on my farm. Under my supervision, they learned about animal husbandry, sustainable farming, and the value of respecting others' property. By the end of their service, they were changed young men who frequently volunteered at local farms. The most satisfying moment came during Patricia's sentencing hearing. The judge, a farmer's daughter herself, had no patience for Patricia's excuses. Mrs. Williams, your blatant disregard for others' property rights, financial responsibility, and basic decency has earned you 5 years in state prison and restitution of $237,000. Perhaps that time will help you develop the respect for boundaries you clearly lack. The most unexpected outcome was how the incident transformed Sycamore Estates. The new board invited me to serve as an official financial advisor, creating a position that formalized the role I'd been quietly performing. They established an annual Good Neighbor Day, where community members volunteered on local farms and learned about agricultural heritage. My farm became an educational destination for residents to understand the challenges and rewards of rural life. Several homeowners even started a community garden on HOA common land, using techniques I taught them. Children from the development now regularly visit to learn about animals and farming, bridging the gap between suburban and rural lifestyles. The shooting range incident, as terrible as it was, ultimately created something beautiful: mutual respect between different ways of life. Sometimes the people who think they hold all the power are actually standing on the thinnest ice. Patricia thought she could bully a simple farmer, never realizing I was silently controlling every dollar she thought she commanded. Remember this: treat everyone with respect, from the CEO in a penthouse to the farmer in muddy boots. You never know who might be secretly pulling the strings of your entire world. And Patricia? Last I heard, she's teaching financial ethics classes to fellow inmates. Ironic how life comes full circle, isn't it?